Ladies and gentlemen, on land, sea, air, or even in outer space, this is the Persistence of Vision podcast, the podcast where we talk about books so you don't have to.
That was lovely, Obi. Yes, hello. Persistence of Vision podcast. If you want to see us online, it is POV-Publishing.com. There you will see works by world-class authors. You'll see comics by world-class comic writers, drawers, that sort of thing. You can see the links to all our past podcasts. And most importantly, you can see the links to buy my book, Why So Much, by Lance Myers, and
my book, The Goddamn Fool, if I recall,
yes,
by LBDO.
Yes, go buy those books because they're phenomenal books.
And again, I am LBDO. I'm your host, and this is my young junior partner, Lance Beavermeyer.
Hey!
And we're very excited today to discuss Dostoevsky's Demons, also known as Dostoevsky's The Devils, also known as Dostoevsky's The Possessed, also known as Dostoevsky's The Demons, also known as Devils, also known as Possessed, with Jason Neulander.
Hi, Jason.
Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks, guys. I'm so excited to be here.
Holy crap, you are excited. Whoa, stand down, young blood.
Really classy.
Holy mackerel.
You're classy.
Yeah, no. This beats Terry Gross by like 10 miles.
You were on Terry Gross?
No.
Okay, well, that's cool to know anyway, though.
Yeah.
So, Jason, when we asked you to be on the podcast, you chose Demons, with all those other alternate titles, of course, Dostoevsky's Demons. Why did you choose such a book? Actually, when you first said, I would like to discuss Dostoevsky's Demons, a book by a Russian existential author named Demons, I thought it was going to be some lighthearted romp. But it was actually turned out to be quite dark. What's up?
Oh my God. Okay. I love this book so much. And the idea that I have an opportunity to share that love with anybody is quite tantalizing to me. So I'm pretty sure this is my favorite book of all time, which is why I just jumped at the opportunity to be able to talk about it. And, Lance, you said something that to me is kind of defines a big reason that I love this book so much, which is that this book is incredibly dark, and yet it is incredibly funny. And that combination of those two things, in my opinion, makes it Dostoevsky's best book and one of the greatest books ever written.
Well, LB, I remember you saying in some previous podcast, maybe it was the Owen Edgerton one, I'm not sure, you had said something about how Notes from the Underground you thought was one of the funniest books you ever read.
Yes, I love that book.
Like, you know what?
Hilarious.
Yeah, I love the book myself. It was the first Dostoevsky I ever read. But it never occurred to me to call it funny. And when you said that, I was like, you know what? You're right. It is a pretty funny book.
Well, I think one of the big misunderstandings that people have of Dostoevsky, because he's no question a challenging read, is that they think Russian great master, literature, these books are long, that they're really serious, and they are really serious. Dostoevsky was wrestling with issues that for him were life and death on a personal level, But one thing I think that I found when I first read this book, which was the first time, I've read this book multiple times. The first time I read this book was in 1998. And I was totally taken aback by how hilarious it is. In fact, it's right at the beginning of the book that Dostoevsky, I think, tips his hand. And it made me wonder, looking at the book in prep for this podcast, if he must have been influenced by Dickens, because Dickens uses the role of the narrator in a very similar way that the narrator is used in this book. And I've read all of Dostoevsky's great novels, and I think he only uses the narrator in this particular way here. And the narrator of this book is an unreliable narrator. So the narrator, unnamed, you have no idea who it is, but he seems to be a witness to everything, or she. But their opinion is so hilariously, like ironically askew of the actual situation at hand. For example, right out of the gate, he introduces Stepan Trofimov. No, I'm going to have trouble pronouncing it. Thank you. As this like almost hero of the, Catherine II era of Tsarist Russia. But you quickly learn that Stepan is a clown, and his own sort of pomposity and just ridiculousness, is evident within, I think, in the first couple of pages, you're like, wait a second, the reliability of this narrator is basically none. And at that point, you're kind of off and running. And then, okay, and here's something to me that was, in that first read that was so fascinating. So my best friend in high school was an emigre from Russia when he was a little kid. And his personality was and is so reminiscent of Pyotr's personality in this book that Pyotr's like also a hilarious, just a mischievous kind of, ultimately he's pretty evil, but hilarious in how the grown-ups all love him.
Yeah.
Even though he is a walking, I wouldn't call him a disaster because he's incredibly calculating, but just like he's just a danger to all these people who find themselves adoring him. And anyway, my buddy Lenny was kind of had that impish, hilarious prankster kind of personality that Pyotr had. So I could immediately identify with him as a character, and I found him to be just riotously funny, and still find him to be riotously funny. The character who has, we're not even getting into the plot. Okay, so let me back up, because I have a very personal story about this book that pertains to me personally. So when I was in high school, a senior in high school, in AP European history, we were assigned this book to read in, I believe the translation we were reading was in fact The Possessed. And I was a voracious reader when I still am a voracious reader. And I, got the book, and it was like a smallish trade, seemed like a smallish trade paperback. I didn't even crack it until about 3 days before the paper was actually due for us to write it. We had to write a 10 to 15 page paper and we had 5 different essay topics. And I open it up and I start reading, and I realize there's absolutely no way that I can read this book in 3 days. It is simply impossible. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to fail this paper. So one of the essay questions that we were given was talk about how Demons is applies the elements of the Book of Revelations to its story.
Yes.
Okay, so and there were 4 other questions. So I went to the library and went to the card catalog. If your listeners don't know what that is, it's just Google it. And I pull open one of the little drawers, the D to E drawer or whatever, and start flipping through to try to find Dostoevsky in there. And I do, and I'm like, this is such a long shot to find Dostoevsky, The Possessed, Revelations, for that to be one of the subjects and as a subject card. Astonishingly, I did. And the library owned this book, which was a collection of essays about Dostoevsky's novels, one of which was exactly that essay question, an answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I got that book out a lot. What's that?
You cheated.
I did. I totally cheated. I plagiarized this.
No.
essay in my class, rewriting it. Like I just opened the book, started typing, rewrote the essay using my, less academic high school vocabulary, but ostensibly plagiarized it. And when I got to page 10 in the paper, I wrote I don't even know where I was in the argument. I just wrote a concluding paragraph and handed it. So Meg McDonald, who was in my class, read the book.
You mean the Meg?
Yeah. So Meg McDonald, bless her, read this book, and threw her all. I knew that she had thrown everything she had into this, reading the book and writing her paper. And when we got the papers back, Meg got a B+ on her paper. I was sitting right behind her, so I could see the red ink, in the grade on the front of her paper. And I got an A+.
Oh, no justice.
And I got the only A in the class on this paper. And Meg, in front of me, burst into tears.
Oh.
She knew that I had cheated. And so this guilt still stays with me to this day. But flash forward from 1987, when I graduated high school, to 1998, and I'm in the Austin Public Library, downtown branch. And I'm like, just look at, how it is in the library. We're just looking at books and wondering what you're going to check out. You're looking for something new. And had no idea what I was going to read. When suddenly in the to be filed on the shelves stacked, in the cart next to the shelves, I saw this spine of a hardcover book, Demons, Fyodor Dostoevsky. And I'm like, now I knew the book that we read was The Possessed, but I also knew it was translated as The Devils. But I was like, how many books about demons and devils could Dostoevsky have titled? It's got to be the same book. So I pick it up and I look at the introduction, and lo and behold, right at the beginning, the translators talk about the different translations of the title. And I'm like, I owe Meg McDonald to read. I've got to read this book. It's the least I can do for Meg is to read this book. And so I just opened it, and then I just couldn't I was like mind blown. Yeah. Because what I saw in it was, one, just a great book, and two, because of that character Piotr, and really kind of latching onto the unreliability of the narrator basically from the first page. I really caught the humor. The book was funny to me on the game.
Now, are you still in touch with Meg?
No. We hadn't talked since high school.
Facebook.
I hope maybe she's a listener.
Send the link. Send the link to this podcast to Meg.
Yeah, I really hope that she is. And Meg, if you are, you've probably forgotten all about this, but I really am sorry.
No,
I wish you had gotten an A.
After this show, Jason, we're going to have to sit down, because I had a very, very similar experience in high school. And it was I who got the A, and this girl who happened to be my girlfriend who got the B, in a very similar situation. And it's a great story. But anyway, let's talk about, first of all, who are you, Jason Neulander? We haven't really touched on that. You're a director, you're a theater company founder, you've made a movie now, you've made a lot of plays. Your movie is called Fugitive Dream. It's in the
Jason Neulander is a giant in this town, creative juggernaut, and he's done many things, and he's really classing up the joint by even joining us here. So thank you for being here, Jason. You said a lot of things in that opening statement there, and we've said the title many times, but it's maybe a little misleading to those who have never encountered the book. Can you tell us a little bit about? It's not actually about supernatural demons. What is demons?
It's about. I think it's about the demons inside of all of us. The premise of the book, but the title is a clue that this is an allegory. So at the surface level, what the story is about is there's this like, it's an intergenerational story that takes place in this little tiny Russian town in the middle of nowhere, where you've got this group of kind of like middle-aged adults who were part of a major social change that took place in Russia in the 19th century, about 20 years before the book takes place, where almost like the hippie generation in the United States like had a big impact on like civil rights and stuff like that we're still feeling the ripple effects of today.
The book itself was written in 1850s,
70s sometime.
It was published in the 1870s. I like to think of Dostoevsky's novels as being around the time of the Civil War. I find that the U.S. Civil War, I find that helpful.
Yeah, this one's late, a little after. I think it's like 1870.
Published like 5-6 years after the Civil War ended.
So, but under Catherine the Great, the big change that happened socially was the serfs were liberated. So they abolished slavery. And so this older generation is sitting proud on top of their kind of liberal credentials, you know, for having been a part of that generation that has freed up the Russian culture a little bit. But there's this younger generation that is not satisfied, and they want more. And it really is the glimmers of what actually became the Russian Revolution. Yeah. But Dostoevsky was inspired to write this story because he was living, what's the word? He was living in France, I think, at the time, but he was an expatriate, that's what it is. And he was living outside of Russia, and he had read this story that stunned him, that these students had killed another student over like a printing press, like something that he thought was nothing. And they called themselves nihilists, these students. And Dostoevsky, when he was a young man, was part of his generation's version of nihilists. And he got arrested for it and sent to Siberia, where in Siberia he became, another prisoner introduced him to the Bible, and he became extremely religious. And he also had epilepsy and, possibly had bipolar disorder. But he came out of Siberia kind of loving the motherland in a way that he was very critical of before then, and also being profoundly religious. And so when he was in exile, he hears this story about this young generation that he sees as totally lacking in morals. Maybe being a reflection of his young self, seeing what he might have become. He takes it very personally, and he comes up with the basic concept for this book, which is that you have this younger generation that secretly, underground, unbeknownst to their elders, is fomenting revolution. And so that's really what this book is about, is this intergenerational story between, and the book shifts perspectives. We go from Stepan, who the narrator talks about early in the book, is of that older generation, but is a clown. Yeah. And then it goes to this younger generation, and it's this character, Nikolai Stavrogin, who is maybe is the character that Dostoevsky maybe most relates to. It's definitely the protagonist of the book, I think. It's an ensemble cast, but
he's the one whose heart we see into.
Yes, and he's conflicted. And he's the one who Pyotr is trying to convince to join the revolution. Pyotr is certain that if Nikolai Stavrogin joins up with the revolution will succeed. But what their revolution is turns out, is based on really nothing. It's just purely destructive. And about a year after I read this book, the Columbine shooting happened. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my God, it's demons all over again. The children of the parents who were part of the 60s generation, who thought that they had, but their kids are totally dissatisfied in ways that they can't even comprehend, And then now, looking at the storming of the Capitol in the United States, to my mind anyway, it's a similar kind of agitation that takes place in this book. But okay, so there's the basic premise. But then what Dostoevsky does, which he does in all of his novels to one degree or another, but I personally think this is his funniest book, is he finds a way to find humor within the story, to make his characters a little bit over the top, a little bit ridiculous. I mean, one of my favorite scenes in the novel is where the revolutionaries are secretly meeting. And they're talking about how, one of them makes this little speech about how, it's the 10% of the elites that are gonna be in charge of the 90% of everybody else. And one of the other characters starts making fun of the guy talking, going, well, you're just presuming you're gonna be one of the elites, but in fact, you're gonna be one of the 90%. And I think it's a hilarious scene. And, and again, it's kind of relevant to right now in some ways.
Well, it's one of the things that makes these books and this time period in Russia so interesting to me is that we have these stark differences between that time and place and ours, and yet these absolutely unavoidable similarities at the same time, right? And we have a society that's so bizarre to us, like the upper classes in Russia at this time speak French.
Yeah.
They speak French. They don't speak Russian. And some of them are so removed from the ordinary people that they literally don't speak Russian very well. They don't really know how to speak Russian. And they're Russians. And yet, so that was sense it's very different. And then at the same time, you have the liberation of the serfs happening almost the same time as the abolition of slavery in the United States. You have these opposing forces in Russia of the Russophiles, who are these religious, Slavophiles rather, who are these very religious, deeply patriotic, somewhat backward people. And then you have these socialist, nihilist, atheists who consider themselves to be the scientific way forward. And some of this humor that you describe comes from this ludicrous juxtaposition of these revolutionary youths who want to destroy these adults, and the slavish adoration and respect that the adults have for these
for the kids. Yeah,
no better example of that probably than Kirillov, who is a great writer in the book, but he's based on Ivan Turgenev.
I know.
The best Russian writers, and
but Dostoevsky hated Turgenev. He thought he was terrible.
Yeah, they were like in the same social circles. It's like if I wrote a book and I made a character based on Lance, it was this absolutely repulsive, ludicrous, idiotic figure. It was really just like a monster because he knows that the revolution, or at least this violence, is being planned, and all he wants to know is it going to happen before or after I'm planning to leave town in a couple of days? He's like literally asking Peter Stepanovich, is this going to happen in within the next 24 hours? I'm going to leave town. And Stepanovich is like, yes, you fucking craven, ludicrous asshole.
One of my favorite scenes in the book also, which is to my mind is just a hysterically funny scene, is the scene where, I'm gonna blank on the character's name, but they've all got to church and they've gone back to the Varvara's house, another one of the older characters, and they're kind of having brunch together or something like that. But the room they're in appears to have, I don't know what, a dozen doors in it. And through each one of the doors, a different character just kind of stumbles into the room, almost Kramer-like out of Seinfeld, And one of the characters who stumbles in is this poor, almost homeless guy who's drunk, and he just starts singing a song about a cockroach. And, it's this complete embarrassment to the rich, aristocratic people who are trying to just have their Sunday, afternoon together. I'm a theater guy. And one of the definitions that I love about a farce is that, one of the key components of a farce is that it's a play that takes place in a room with tons of doors so that you can have all those ridiculous entrances and exits. Mm-hmm. And I feel like reading that, I'm like, okay, Dostoevsky, obviously, he knows what he's doing. He is letting us, the reader, know that what's happening here is just totally over the top ridiculous, intentionally over the top ridiculous. He's going to keep adding steps that make it more and more and more ridiculous, just to show but in service of what he sees as a real danger to his country, which is the complacency of this older generation that has patted itself on the back and decided their work is done. And also, I think what's interesting in this book, more than any other Dostoevsky book, I feel like, Dostoevsky himself is very conflicted, because I think that he believes that freeing the serfs is a good thing, yet at the same time, he really wants this like very traditional, he himself is a Slavophile.
Well, see,
So
yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to bring up to you. And I feel like I maybe am going to expose myself as someone who's not quite bright by asking this question.
Sure.
Or maybe just not quite as well read, or haven't done as much research into the Russian, the history of this whole thing. But let me ask you this question. Okay, as I'm reading, I go back and forth between trying, well, I struggle to find his point of view, because I find myself, I mean, he's parodying, he's writing something that totally just mocks the whole liberation type movement. He's mocking those who are going to stray away from a very conservative Christian Russian Orthodox viewpoint. And so I started to wonder, well, okay, you just mentioned like it kind of being compared to the storming of the Capitol, but I'm not quite sure I understand which side. Would Dostoevsky have worn a MAGA hat? I don't know.
no,
No.
I don't think he would have. I think that
He's wanting this conservative viewpoint. He's wanting, like you said, you feel him struggling with, you think he would have approved of the freeing of the serfs and that sort of thing, but he also is very conservative in his viewpoint about embracing the politics of the motherland, right?
I think, but keep in mind, he's purposely living in the West. I think, I don't know. I mean, who really knows? But I think
one thing
that
really, oh, go ahead.
I just think that he's really conflicted about it, and I also think that I also think that this book itself opens up a worldview or a window into the psyche of Russia today. Like, there's this total love-hate relationship with the West in Russia. I mean, Western ideas ultimately led to communism there, right? And then, and so, and now, or even prior to that, Western influence gets the aristocracy and the czars to speak French, like they try to emulate Western culture, and so and now today, Putin badly wants to be taken seriously by the West, yet he's totally critical of the West at the same time. And so, and trying to mess things up in the West. And so, I think that kind of the psyche, this inferiority complex of that's kind of part and parcel of Russian culture is just so in evidence in this book, and it makes it that much more relevant. And it's why everybody really ought to.
It's the same inferiority complex we have in the U.S., right? I mean, we when we want to sound sophisticated, whom do we emulate? We emulate Europe and Europeans. We look up to them as having a kind of superiority to us culturally and intellectually. I mean, there's resistance to that idea, but it's certainly ingrained in us.
I think it's different, though. I mean, I think our culture, is kind of like, has in its core, this idea of manifest destiny and exceptionalism and stuff like that. But Russian culture, from Peter the Great, definitely is in conflict with itself over like what it actually wants to be.
Well, another amazing thing about Russia at this time is that, you're talking about the liberation of the serfs, we're talking about feudalism.
Right.
That's how backward in some ways the society was. And it's no wonder that guys like Peter the Great and subsequent leaders wanted to emulate Europe is because they were literally living in the Dark Ages.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
But
Exactly.
the thing I wanted to mention earlier really quickly in response to Lance's thing is just one thing we're not mentioning about Dostoevsky's life is that's really probably one of the most remarkable things that's ever happened to anybody was his mock execution.
Oh,
You know, Dostoevsky was not just in Siberia, he was sentenced to death. He was dragged to a firing squad and was standing in front of the firing squad when a quote unquote last minute messenger shows up with a pardon from the Tsar. You know, of course, this was all set up, you know, in advance. They weren't really going to execute him, but he didn't know that. And so you have this absolutely astonishing moment where he comes to reckon with his socialist atheist past and his relationship with Russia, all in this moment of looking into the barrels of those rifles.
Yeah, and it's the moment where he finds God.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's this incredible bit in Crime and Punishment that deals direct. You know, it's a part in Raskolnikov's mind. You know, where we're just in his thoughts, and he visualizes that exact experience. You know, and yes, it had a profound impact, and so I think Dostoevsky has a complex, even though he says on the surface that he wants this very traditional Russian Orthodox kind of religious-based culture, and is, you know, deeply rooted in, say, Brothers Karamazov. I think that he, underneath that surface level, it's kind of the lady doth protest too much. I think he's conflicted about it. I think that's what makes the books interesting, because otherwise they just be polemics, and they're not.
Sure. Yeah, I think
that was
I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, is that these aren't going to map very neatly onto any particular, you know, metaphor for, you know, like, or you know, he's writing very complex characters in very complex situations. Granted, I mean, some of it is pretty straightforward, you know, mocking certain lifestyles or certain philosophies and whatnot, but they are very complex and very three-dimensional people. Of course, you mentioned, you know, you mentioned Nikolai, the main guy, like being, when you talked about him, you had kind of made him out to be this very popular, very, very cool guy, and he is. But did you read the what was initially the edited, or the, what do you call it?
Yeah, the scene where he goes to the monk.
Oh my God! You talk about
censored? Yes, it was censored.
Oh, yes. Tell us about that. What happens in the if you dare? This main character goes to see a monk, and do you remember? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, and
because it had such a dark. He admitted to this horrible thing, which I feel like really does clear up a lot about his character, and I do understand that why the editor initially censored it, but at the same time, it does change how we view
your understanding of who he is.
Right.
Well, you know, I think that idea, that scene is stunning. It's not a funny scene.
Oh no.
You know, it's like so much of the book is funny, and that scene is definitely not. And I think it definitely changes your understanding of the book, because it reveals his, you know, big secret, which I don't want to give away because people should read. But okay, so on the one hand, you've got this like really funny, dark story about these revolutionaries who just wreak havoc on this town. I mean, the ending is apocalyptic. And then on the other hand, it is an allegory. And so I think that scene with the monk actually is like to my mind anyway, a kind of connected tissue between those worlds of the sort of the material world and the allegorical world. There's something about that. What struck me more than Stavrogin's secret was the almost dreamlike quality that chapter has. It feels like it has it's almost otherworldly.
That's one of the greatest gifts, don't you think, is creating these dreamlike scenarios.
Incredible.
Think of Brothers Karamazov, you think of Crime and Punishment, these scenes where people are in a fever. You know, he himself, of course, was an epileptic.
Yeah.
So he experienced such moments himself very vividly, and he's just a master at recreating them.
Well, and so for him, Stavrogin is, on the allegorical level, if you read the book of Revelations, he is the Antichrist, as described in the book of Revelations. It was a little bit different than the Antichrist is described in, say, the Omen. The Antichrist has to be convinced to take his role, and it's the beast who has to do the convincing. And the beast in this book is Piotr. And so, you know, and then once you know that, you can start to see this complex, and I think like awesomely sort of desperate relationship that Piotr has with Stavrogen. I mean, he is convinced that he cannot succeed in his plan without getting Stavrogen to join up in the plan, you know, and once their partnership is kind of formed, then all hell literally breaks loose in the town. I mean, it's the ending of that book is like simultaneously so hilarious and so horrifying that it's just, you know, I mean, I can't really think of another book that has such a, you know, like rich, you know, amazing, jaw-dropping climax than Demons. You
know, you mentioned, you know, that when you say Dostoevsky and you know, this novel so thick and daunting, but it actually reads really quickly and really easily. It goes down smooth, except for one thing. It's so silly, but if I found myself, if I could take my digital book and do a search and replace and put like American names, I would.
Oh yeah.
Would be so much easier to read, but
sounds silly, but you have characters named Lizaveta, Lebkianina, Lebkinin, and two characters named von Lemke, and that's just the L's. It's very, very challenging to keep them straight.
Well, and you know
the beauty is of this particular translation, which I think we all read, which is the Peviar-Volokonsky translation. You know, is they have a character listing in the front. And when the first time I read this book, I was continually referring to the character listing in the front and just, you know, this is why I recommend reading actual books instead of Kindle books or listening to audiobooks, you know, because it's so easy just to flip back and find out. And yes, you do have to take that extra step. And also Dostoevsky writes in this very dense form of prose that can be hard to decipher. I mean, there's definitely points where I found the first time I read it where I was reading sentences multiple times just to truly understand what was actually happening. You know, I think the gateway to reading him, in my opinion, is to trust that if you think it's supposed to be funny, it is. You know, and really allowing that his very rich, dark, broad sense of humor to you know, kind of wash over you and give you a smile. That's what's so amazing, is he's just so entertaining a writer. Yeah,
it is. It really is. And like I said, I think for anyone who has not read in Dostoevsky, again, Notes from the Underground is a much thinner, much less daunting thing to take on, and that one is hilarious, and that one is actually, it's a good first step. But Demons is also.
So Demons was my first Dostoevsky, and I've read almost everything by him. It inspired me to go on and just read almost everything else by him ever since. And I've read Brothers Karamazov twice since then, And believe it or not, just this summer, I read I think I had read Crime and Punishment a long time ago, but then when I was possibly rereading it, I didn't remember anything. So it's like, maybe I thought I read it and never did. Also another hilariously funny book.
I think that's his most difficult book, Brothers Karamazov. I find it I've read it. I've read the whole thing, but I find it very challenging.
Well, the first half is slow. The second half is like a crime novel. The second half of it is just a total page turner. You know, it's a mystery story, like who killed Dad. So, but that first half is super slow. Although it does have the Grand Inquisitor chapter in it, which is
great. It's great. It's just difficult. You know, it's like
Yeah.
a lot of things in life that take some extra effort.
But I think, you know, Brothers Karamazov and Crime and Punishment are the two books that everybody talks about when they talk about Dostoevsky. You know, and let's face it, these days, everybody's talking about Dostoevsky. But I think, you know, I would put my vote in for Demons being his like true masterwork. I think it's his best book.
All right, one last question before the thunder gathers on the horizon. And this is an extension of what Lance was asking. The reader who is sitting down and opening up page 1 of the Demons is facing a very daunting task, a very serious task. It's going to be a very pleasurable one, a very enlightening and edifying one. But some people are going to be listening to this and saying, I don't have time, I don't have the energy to put into this. Tell me why the listener right now should just absolutely go on and say, I'm going to take this on.
Well, I mean, I would nowadays, like, who hasn't committed to, like, you know, 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, or, you know, like, there's plenty of things out there that take time to consume yet are very rewarding. And, you know, I'll just say it, you know, let's compare for a second, as I think most people who read this book would do. Let's compare Demons to Game of Thrones. Demons rocks all the way to the final page. Game of Thrones fails in its final 2 seasons. So if you're going to make a big commitment like that, why not do something that's going to be awesome all the way through instead of something that's going to disappoint you in this final viewing?
Beautiful. All right. Well, I do think I hear the sound of thunder.
I'm definitely seeing the clouds roll in right now. What about you, Jason? You hearing any thunder out there?
I'm feeling fear.
Well,
That foreboding you feel is the lightning round.
that's right. You should be scared. Feel it.
Be
Here it
terrified.
All right. As repeat listeners will recall, at the end of each podcast, we hit the guest with a barrage of questions, and you can answer in a few sentences quickly, and then we'll just keep going. Okay, ready? Here we go. Name the first time you fell in love with a book.
Wizard of Oz, when I was a kid, little kid.
Okay. I
Oh, no, Sylvester and the Magic Pebble. What am I talking about?
Sylvester and the Magic Pebble.
Yeah.
How old were you when you read that?
I don't know, it's little, you know, it's 2nd grade or something. Oh, it's still one of my favorites.
Beautiful.
We could do an episode of your show.
We should. I would love it. Has a book ever changed your mind about anything?
Oh, man. Yes.
All right. Moving on. Has a book ever changed your life?
Yes. Demons changed my life.
Woohoo!
Hey, real quick, just tell me how, in a few words, how did Demons change your life? Apart from the story about the the plagiarism.
Well, Demons was like the first classic novel that I chose to read. You know, there wasn't like assigned to me in a class. And I loved it so much that I just started reading all these other classics. So, you know, I mean, it just opened the door to good Lord, just a plethora of amazing literature that's out there. But like, you know, Dickens, you know, I would never have experienced Great Expectations, another one of my all-time favorite books, if I had not read Demons. You know, I probably never would have read Beloved if I had never read Demons, another one of my all-time favorites. You know, and then whatever, there's just, you know, tons and tons and tons.
That's a great answer, because I think it touches on something that we can all, you know, sort of relate to, as far as the way it feels to read a classic book for class versus for pleasure.
Yeah.
You know? But okay, on to the next one. Has a book ever made you cry?
Oh yeah, I cry all the time at the end of books. Let me think of I just finished reading Ulysses and cried at the end of it.
Ah, nice.
Really? Interesting. At the
Yeah,
monologue?
that's another one where I could go, like, we could do a podcast. That actually I just finished reading it about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and kind of prepped myself by reading a biography of James Joyce in advance, and then found this fantastic blog that kind of summarized each of the chapters in a way that didn't like dumb it down too much. And oh my God, I mean, Ulysses, I mean, they say it's a masterwork, but I'm just going to vouch for that. It is a fucking masterwork. It's amazing.
You know what? I may have to get your recommendation as far as like a guidebook for that. I've never read Ulysses, but it's a very intimidating thing to take on.
Well, I can tell you now. I'll just say it. So you should read the Richard Ellman biography of James Joyce. It's the definitive biography of Joyce, which gives you all kinds of, and it's like it does like footnotes, not endnotes, but footnotes. Like where it'll reference where in his various writing this like events in his life are captured, because his books are very autobiographical, and then the blog, I'm gonna forget the name of it. It's like Ulysses Revealed or something like that, and it's this guy who basically summarizes these the chapters. He teaches Ulysses. He says he's read it like 16 times. And then it has a walking tour of Dublin like tied to it, so that you can actually so that was extremely helpful as I was actually reading the book. And it breaks down the like each of the chapters in terms of how they're like which part of the Odyssey they're connected to, so that you can actually understand like what James Joyce was actually doing. My favorite chapter of that book was the Aeolus chapter, which is the winds. And it takes place in the newspaper building, and the newsboys, you know, the guys who sell the newspapers on the streets, kind of flutter through that chapter almost like leaves picked up in like a dust devil or something like that. And it's just, and it is just ingenious how he finds ways to like get at his theme without being overt really about it at all. And then what was the real shocker to me was how much I just fell in love with the character of Leopold Bloom. And so when Molly, his wife, the Penelope character in the story, just affirms at the end that he's the man for her in the final chapter, it's just so beautiful. I mean, I just started crying.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, that sounds. We'll have you back. We'll have you back to talk about James Joyce. Name a book that you've read more than once.
I just have both Ulysses and Demons.
Oh, you had read Ulysses twice.
I powered through it when I was 22.
Okay.
With no support and help whatsoever. On my own, I was in grad school. I didn't understand a word of what I read.
That's exactly.
But I checked it off the list and said, someday I need to reread this.
I always told people, for the first time I read Joyce's Ulysses, I say, I read that book. That's it. I literally read the words.
Yeah.
I didn't get anything, didn't follow a word,
Yeah.
but I read it. Now I've read it again.
As the saying goes, you don't read Ulysses, you reread Ulysses, is what I've heard.
Yeah.
I've never read Ulysses or reread it, but I look forward to it.
Oh man. And it's funny, also another book that's totally daunting, but hilarious.
Yeah.
Like Joyce's sense of humor permeates every page.
Jason, this is the final question. It's the big one. This is the big one. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
There's the real lightning strike. Have you committed any poetry to memory? No is a perfectly acceptable answer, but we're going to be very disappointed in you.
Yeah.
Well, do song lyrics count?
No.
The man speaks.
All right.
Spoken.
I have one poem that I've committed to memory.
Let's hear it.
It's the E.E. Cummings poem, Loneliness. Loneliness.
All right.
I love that. E.E. Cummings. What a man.
It's such a sad affair, too.
Well, loneliness is beautiful because it's, the eyes and then the L's look like ones. And so it's the way it's written on the page, it conveys loneliness through the singleness of the individual letters. And anyway, it's a beautiful, beautiful, concise poem. Easy to memorize.
Jason Neulander, ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Neulander, director, author, playwright, superstar.
Reader, voracious reader.
Reader, leader and reader and writer and director and superstar. And a great guest, as you've all enjoyed.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. It's been a dream of mine to be on this show. So thanks for.
We'll have you back, sir.
All right, I'll be glad to do it.
Ulysses, that sounds like you're bursting with ideas about Ulysses. So.
Oh my gosh, I could do that. We could do a two-part episode on that one.
There you go.
So I'll start reading tomorrow, and we can have you on in 2025. Yeah. Well, cool.
All right, read the Ellman biography first, though, because that really does give you the prep that you need to be able to just love reading Ulysses.
I also recommend the Bloomsday book and the Great Courses series, lecture series on Ulysses are both excellent.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you everybody for tuning in. This has been your POV podcast, Persistence of Vision podcast. If you want more, go to POV-Publishing.com. That's our website. You can see all the links to all the past podcasts and all future podcasts. Join us again someday. Thank you for having us. I'm Lance Fever Myers.
I'm LBDO.
And
I'm Jason Neulander.
Yeah!
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.